The ship shook, its hull creaking and groaning as the battle raged outside. The din of combat was almost deafening, a chorus of laser blasts and missile strikes that echoed through the metal corridors. At the helm, Lieutenant Lena Norrick gripped the controls, her fingers dancing across the console in a fluid rhythm. Her brow was furrowed in concentration, eyes flicking between the various readouts that blinked in a frantic dance of red alerts and flashing warnings. It had been a long few hours since they'd entered enemy space, and things were looking worse by the second. The last 3 ambushes had stripped away nearly half the ship's armament, and now they were running on fumes. "Status report," she barked, her voice firm but tinged with frustration. Her officers scrambled to respond, each of them working their stations with the precision that had gotten them this far. "Shields at 20%. Lieutenant Tessa, her weapons officer, yelled over the intercom. "Engines running at 65% efficiency. We can't keep this up much longer, Lieutenant." "Countermeasures online," shouted Sergeant Joran from the back, his hands moving faster than anyone could track. "But they'll be out of range in 10 minutes. After that, we're sitting ducks." Lena's jaw clenched. 10 minutes. That was barely enough time to strategize, let alone break free. The enemy ships were closing in fast, their sleek forms like predators circling prey. They were outgunned, outnumbered, and outmaneuvered. But there was one thing Lena had learned in her years of service: never assume defeat. The odds were stacked against them, but she'd faced worse. She turned to Tessa, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "Can you get us to the outer rim of the system?" Tessa glanced at the readouts, her lips tight with a mixture of doubt and determination. "It'll be close. The thrusters are barely responding." Lena nodded, her mind already working through the options. The outer rim was their only chance to escape, but the route was filled with asteroid fields and debris, a maze of danger that would slow them down, but could also throw off their pursuers. If they could reach it, they'd have a chance. Maybe. "We'll need a distraction," Lena muttered, half to herself. "Something to slow them down." Joran, always the problem solver, perked up from his station. "We could vent the main reactor. Overload it. Force them to deal with the debris." Lena's mind raced. It wasn't a bad idea. If they triggered the overload at just the right moment, they could create a field of debris dense enough to make pursuit difficult. But it was a gamble. They didn't have time to test the calculations, and one wrong move could destroy the ship. "It's risky," she said, weighing the options. "But I don't see another choice." "Make it happen," she ordered, turning back to the controls. As the crew worked, Lena glanced at the hollow map of their surroundings, studying the enemy formations. The enemy fleet was large, too large. They'd been outclassed from the start, sent in to explore the fringes of a hostile galaxy with limited resources. It hadn't been a mission they'd signed up for, but it was the one they had. The only way out was through. She tightened her grip on the controls. The countdown for reactor overload began. "On my mark," Lena said. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers as soon as the debris hits. We need every second we can get." The seconds ticked by, the tension building like a taut string ready to snap. Then, just as she gave the signal, the ship jerked, the reactor flaring to life as a surge of energy roared through the ship's systems. Explosions rocked the hull, sending shockwaves through the corridors. The crew's ears rang from the force of the blast. Lena didn't flinch. She was already pushing the throttle, the ship lurching forward as the debris field exploded outward behind them, sending fragments of metal and rock tumbling through space. "Let's move, people," she shouted, the adrenaline pumping through her veins. "Evasive maneuvers now." For a moment, it seemed to work. The enemy fleet, caught off guard by the explosion, hesitated. But the respite was short-lived. A warning flashed across the console: an enemy ship had managed to navigate the debris, its engines flaring as it came into pursuit. "Not good," Tessa muttered, eyes glued to her terminal. "That ship's too fast for us. It's closing in. Do we have a shot?" Lena asked. "Not with what we've got left," Tessa replied, shaking her head. "We're out of ammunition. Lena cursed under her breath. A ship without weapons was a sitting duck, and they were sitting right in the crosshairs of an enemy ship that had no intention of letting them escape. She glanced at the view screen, seeing the pursuing vessel growing larger. The enemy was playing it cool, staying just far enough away to avoid a risky engagement, but close enough to keep the pressure on. Lena's mind churned, racing for a solution. They needed to do something they hadn't tried yet, something desperate. "That's it," she muttered, a spark of realization flashing through her. "Tessa, do you have any remaining stealth protocols?" Tessa looked confused for a moment. "You want to hide from them?" "We're not exactly equipped for stealth." "Just trust me," Lena interrupted. "Do it." The next few seconds felt like an eternity. As the enemy ship closed the distance, Lena steeled herself. It was a long shot. They didn't have much time, and the ship's systems were barely holding together as it was. But in the depths of space, where every ship was a potential enemy, one thing had always been clear: if you couldn't win through firepower, you had to rely on something else. And Lena had an idea. It wasn't conventional. It might not even be logical. But in that moment, it was the only plan they had left. The ship's stealth systems began to hum as Tessa activated the cloaking field. The hull sensors flickered as the ship began to fade from view, its outlines blurring into the vastness of space. But it was a partial stealth system, the kind that only worked when the ship was absolutely still. Any movement, no matter how small, would betray their position. "Now or never," Lena whispered, her hands steady on the controls. She threw the throttle forward, sending the ship lurching in an unpredictable direction, as random and chaotic as possible. They had no chance of escaping the enemy, not head-on. But if they could throw them off long enough. The ship trembled as the engines surged to life, hurtling them through space like an erratic missile. The enemy ship followed, taking the bait. But it wasn't enough. Despite the cloaking field, the enemy ship had already locked onto their position. "Damn it!" Lena cursed, sweat dripping down her face as she desperately tried to keep the ship steady. It was a game of inches now. If they could just make it through the asteroid field, maybe, just maybe, they'd be able to lose their tail. But that was a big if. The ship groaned under the strain as Lena pushed the engines harder than they'd ever been pushed before. The hum of the thrusters seemed to grow louder, echoing through the walls like a heartbeat, as if it too was aware of the danger that hung in the air. Outside, the vast expanse of the asteroid field loomed, an unpredictable, chaotic mess of rock and debris. In this moment, it was their best hope. But it was also their greatest risk. Lena's fingers danced over the controls, guiding the ship through the twisting maze of asteroids, each one a potential death sentence if they collided. The cloaking field flickered intermittently, a constant reminder of their tenuous position. One misstep, one too vigorous maneuver, and they'd be visible again, an easy target for the enemy ship hot on their heels. "Stay steady," Lena muttered under her breath, her eyes locked on the rotating asteroids ahead. "Stay steady, stay hidden. Come on." Tessa's voice cut through the tension. "They're not giving up, Lieutenant. The enemy ship's locking onto us again. Our cloak is barely holding. We've got maybe 5 minutes before they spot us again." Lena clenched her teeth, knowing that 5 minutes was not nearly enough time. "Joran. Any way we can increase our speed?" Joran's reply was strained. "Not without burning out the engines. We're already pushing them past their safe limits. We might get a burst of speed, but it won't last long." Lena cursed, her eyes scanning the nearby asteroids. It was a dangerous dance, weaving through massive chunks of rock that floated aimlessly in space. She couldn't afford a single misstep. The problem wasn't just the enemy ship, it was the asteroids themselves. They didn't care who you were or what you were doing. If you hit one, you were finished. No warnings, no second chances. A warning flashed on the console, engine power fluctuating. "Damn it." Lena slammed a fist on the console, frustration bubbling up. She couldn't afford to lose any more power. "Tessa, what's our status on weapons systems?" Tessa's fingers moved quickly over the display, her face set in a grim expression. "We're out. Nothing left but the last of our point defense lasers. But those won't be enough to stop the enemy ship." Lena's mind raced. They were trapped in the asteroid field with no way to fight back. They couldn't outrun the enemy either, not like this. She had to think of something else. They needed to turn the tables, to take control of the situation. "Joran," she said, a plan forming in her mind. "How fast can we reconfigure the ship's remaining systems for a one-time energy burst?" He looked confused for a moment, but then his eyes lit up. "Are you suggesting we overload our remaining systems for a short boost of power? It could give us the burst we need to shake them off." "That's exactly what I'm suggesting," Lena said, her voice firm. "But we need to time it perfectly. If we do it too early, we won't have the power to escape the asteroid field. If we do it too late, the enemy will catch us." Joran nodded, already working his terminal furiously. "I'll reroute all available energy into the engines and weapons. But we'll need a few moments to make sure it won't blow the ship apart." The tension in the air thickened. Lena knew this was a desperate gamble. They were running on fumes. If the enemy caught them, they would be obliterated. No question. The asteroid field was their last chance, and even that was a death trap. "Do it," Lena ordered, her voice unwavering. As Joran worked, Lena's hands tightened around the ship's controls, preparing for what was coming. The enemy was relentless, closing in slowly, trying to predict their every move. But she had one advantage: unpredictability. The asteroid field was full of risks, but it was also full of potential traps, places where the enemy's superior technology might falter. The enemy ship had already managed to keep up with them, skirting around the field's outer edge, clearly trying to anticipate where they would go next. It wasn't a question of if they'd catch up, it was a question of when. "Power boost is ready," Joran called. "We'll have 5 seconds of extreme burst, enough to break through their pursuit range. But after that, we'll be dead in the water." Lena swallowed hard, her heart pounding in her chest. 5 seconds was nothing. But if they could make it count. "Get ready," Lena said. "Once we get that burst, we're going full throttle for the closest gravity well. If we're lucky, the enemy won't be able to track us through the distortion." "We can make it," Tessa said, her voice steely. "We just need to trust the plan." Lena didn't answer. She couldn't afford to. There was no time for doubt now. With a sharp exhale, Lena slammed the throttle forward. The ship lurched violently, nearly throwing her from her seat as the engine surged. For a brief moment, they were flying faster than they'd ever gone, the enemy's pursuing ship barely a dot on the radar behind them. Then, just as suddenly, the ship bucked again, a deep, terrifying groan vibrating through the metal as the power boost started to flicker and wane. The enemy ship wasn't far behind, its pursuit re-engaged. "Brace for impact," Joran shouted. The ship lurched again, but this time it wasn't the power burst, it was the field of asteroids closing in around them. A massive chunk of rock, the size of a small moon, was headed straight for them. Lena veered the ship desperately to the left, but the distance was closing too fast. "Not enough time," Tessa shouted. "Wheel." There was a massive crash, a sharp jolt that sent Lena's vision swimming. The ship shuddered violently as metal screeched against metal. They had clipped the asteroid, just enough to send them off course. "Report," Lena barked. Joran's voice came through, strained but still clear. "Hull damage. We've lost power to the aft thrusters. We're drifting." Tessa's voice was tense with frustration. "The enemy's already recovering. They're coming in fast." Lena's pulse quickened. They were no longer in control. The enemy ship was just seconds away from finishing them off. And yet, as she stared at the blinking red console, one thought kept circling in her mind. They weren't done. Not yet. "Give me everything you've got left," Lena said, her voice steady. "Full thrusters. We'll fight this with what we have." Her crew responded without hesitation, the last remnants of their power surging into the engines. They were running on fumes, but they were still flying. And that was all that mattered. For now. The ship shook violently as the last remnants of power surged into the engines, the hull groaning as if it, too, were trying to resist the inevitable. Lena could hear the hum of the failing thrusters as they fought to keep the ship on course, trying to maintain the momentum they had. Through the viewports, the asteroid field loomed closer, a swirling, chaotic storm of rock and debris. It was the only cover they had left, but even it felt like a death sentence now. Their pursuit was closing in fast. The enemy ship was relentless. Lena gripped the controls, her fingers twitching with the instinct to do something, anything, to change their fate. The enemy was tracking them with precision now, adjusting their path to match the erratic movements of Lena's ship, closing in slowly but surely. The cloak was useless. The asteroid field was a gamble that had already failed. And now, they were floating, wounded, and exposed in the heart of it all. Status? Lena barked, her voice rising over the thrum of alarms and the creaking of the ship's aging frame. Joran's voice came through, strained but resolute. Thrusters are offline. We're dead in the water, Lieutenant. They've already got us locked. Damn it, Lena muttered, her gaze darting between the readouts and the distant enemy ship closing in like a predator on its prey. There was no escape. No last-minute miracle. Any suggestions? Tessa's voice came in, sharp with the edge of desperation. Her weapons console was flashing red, warning that they had no usable ammunition left. The remaining defenses were barely functioning, and the ship's systems were fried. They were a sitting target. For a moment, Lena simply stared at the view screen, the image of the pursuing enemy ship growing larger and larger. They were outmatched in every sense. The enemy had superior technology, a faster ship, and, if the rumors were true, a far more experienced crew. All the odds were stacked against them, and all their plans had crumbled under pressure. They were on the edge of defeat. But then, something inside her clicked. It was that instinctive, gut feeling that had saved her more times than she could count. If they couldn't escape through force, if they couldn't outwit their enemy with conventional tactics, then they would have to do something unexpected. Something that would turn the tables, however slim the chance. Listen up, Lena said, her voice sharp with resolve. She turned back to her crew, their faces pale but determined. We have one last chance. We won't outrun them, and we won't outgun them. But we can make them doubt. We'll fight dirty. Tessa's eyes narrowed, her fingers pausing over her console. What are you thinking, Lieutenant? Lena didn't answer immediately. Instead, she leaned over the navigation panel, tracing the path ahead with her eyes. We've been running, trying to lose them. But what if we don't run anymore? What if we turn the tables? What if we give them a reason to hesitate, make them think they're up against something worse than they can handle? Joran raised an eyebrow. You want to bluff? At this point? Lena's lips twisted into a grim smile. Bluff? No. I want them to believe that we've got something they haven't seen before. Something they can't predict. I'm not giving them a chance to make the kill shot. I'm giving them a reason to second-guess it. Tessa blinked, comprehension dawning. You want us to send out a distress signal? Lena nodded. But not just any distress signal. We make it look like we've got backup coming. We broadcast it on all frequencies, loud and clear. Enough to make them think we're about to be reinforced. Joran snorted. You think they'll buy that? We're alone out here. We're already out of time. Exactly. Lena cut him off, her voice low and steady. They're closing in fast because they think we're dead. If we make them believe reinforcements are on the way, they'll hesitate. Maybe long enough for us to make our move. They won't risk getting caught in a crossfire if they think a bigger threat is on the way. It was a desperate gamble. The kind of trick that worked in old war stories, but rarely in real life. But they had no other choice. Lena didn't give them time to argue. She motioned for Tessa to begin the transmission. Do it now, she commanded. Tessa quickly went to work, her fingers flying over the console. "This is going to take a minute to get the broadcast out," she muttered, her face pale but focused. "It won't be subtle, but it might be convincing enough." "Do it," Lena said again, her voice a little more forceful. As the distress signal began to broadcast, Lena turned her attention back to the enemy ship. They were within striking distance now, just a few kilometers away, and their guns were already locked on. "Are they buying it?" Lena asked, her voice taut with anxiety. "Not yet," Tessa replied. "We need to push the signal further, make it seem like it's coming from a fleet. It'll take a few more seconds." Before she could finish, the enemy ship fired. The first blast missed, by sheer luck, but the second one was closer, streaking across the vastness of space like a streak of death. Lena cursed, her heart hammering as she forced the ship into a sharp, unpredictable turn, barely avoiding the blast. But the enemy wasn't giving up. They were calculating their shots now, precision weapons designed to end things quickly. They knew the ship was nearly crippled. And yet, they hesitated. "Is it working?" Lena growled. "It's working," Tessa said, her voice tinged with surprise. "They're pulling back. They're scanning for reinforcements." Lena allowed herself a brief moment of relief, but it was short-lived. The enemy had paused, but it was only temporary. They'd be back on the offensive soon, and they couldn't afford to keep this up for much longer. The bluff had worked, but they only had seconds before the enemy realized they were vulnerable. "We need to move now," Lena said, her voice dropping into a deadly calm. "Joran, what can we do to get this ship moving again?" Joran didn't hesitate. "If we reroute the remaining power into the forward thrusters, we might have enough juice for a few seconds of full speed." "Do it." As Joran worked quickly, Lena's mind was already racing ahead. The enemy ship had pulled back, but not out of range. They couldn't keep running forever. She needed to make the most of the hesitation they'd bought themselves. The ship hummed as the power surged. And then, with a sudden lurch, they were moving fast. Lena slammed the controls forward, forcing the ship into a high-speed dash straight for the enemy's flank. It wasn't enough to fully escape, but it was enough to throw them off balance. "Engage evasive maneuvers," Lena shouted. The ship lurched as she steered it away from the incoming enemy fire, the sudden burst of speed giving them just enough of an edge to throw off the enemy's aim. The sound of laser fire cracked through the radio as the enemy ship tried to recover, but Lena wasn't waiting for them to make their move. Now, it was time to fight back. "Prepare to fire," Lena said, voice steady. "We're not running anymore. We're taking the fight to them." Her crew's response was immediate. Tessa worked the last of their defensive lasers into place, firing them off with a precision that was almost chilling. Lena grinned. The enemy had made a critical mistake. They'd underestimated the resolve of a crew with nothing left to lose. Now, with no other options, they were about to face a desperate, yet unpredictable enemy. And in a fight where no one was holding back, anything could happen. The ship shook again as their last-ditch evasive maneuver threw them into a sharp, jarring turn. Lena's hands were firmly gripping the controls, the knuckles white with tension. Her crew worked in silence around her, their expressions grim yet focused. The energy they had poured into the ship's systems was nearly depleted, and their remaining weapons were only good for a few more desperate shots. Time was running out. The enemy ship had begun to recalibrate, closing in on them once more. The hesitation they'd shown when they thought reinforcements were coming had been brief. Now, they were back to full speed, relentless and unforgiving. "We can't keep this up," Joran muttered, his voice low but urgent. "The power is almost gone. If we don't break off soon, we won't have the energy to escape, let alone fight." Lena knew he was right. Their bluff had worked, but only for a moment. They had no more tricks left, no more games to play. It was just them, a wounded ship, and an enemy that was closing in for the kill. But Lena wasn't done. Not yet. She took a deep breath, her mind racing. There had to be another way. They couldn't just give up and die in this asteroid field. They had to find a way out, a way to make their last stand count. And then, like a bolt of lightning, it hit her. "Joran, listen to me," Lena said, her voice steady and sharp. "I need you to reroute all remaining power into the shields. Every last ounce of it. We'll make them think we're about to blow." Joran blinked, confusion flickering across his face. "Are you crazy? That's suicide. We need the last of our power to move, to escape." "Just trust me," Lena cut him off. "If we give them an easy target, they'll pounce. But if they think we're about to self-destruct, if we make them believe we're going to take them down with us, they'll hesitate. They'll pull back. That's our only shot." Tessa's voice came through, tinged with disbelief. "You want us to fake a self-destruct? In this condition? You really think that'll stop them?" Lena met her eyes through the viewport, her gaze steady. "It has to. They think we're already dead. If we give them the impression that we're willing to take them down with us, something worse than their calculations can handle, they'll hesitate long enough for us to escape." There was a long pause, the hum of the failing ship the only sound as everyone absorbed the gravity of her words. They were already running on fumes. What Lena was proposing was a last-ditch gamble. If it didn't work, there would be nothing left. No backup. No retreat. But there was no other choice. Joran didn't argue. He knew as well as she did that this was their only hope. "Fine," he said, already moving to reroute the power. "It's a long shot, but it's the only shot we've got." Lena turned to Tessa, her tone firm. "I need that distress signal to go out again. One more time. I want them to hear the countdown to self-destruct. Full broadcast." Tessa's fingers flew over her console. "Broadcasting now. You're crazy, you know that?" "Just do it," Lena said, her voice resolute. The enemy ship was almost upon them. The beeping from the proximity alarms grew louder as the countdown to disaster clicked into place. Lena knew it wasn't enough to just seem like they were ready to blow. They had to sell it. Every second counted. She had to make them believe they were staring down the barrel of a ticking time bomb, one that they couldn't risk destroying. "We've got to sell it," Lena murmured under her breath. "We can't let them think they can just pick us off." Joran quickly worked at the console, eyes flicking between screens. "Overloading the shields now. It'll look like we're preparing for a catastrophic detonation. But we only have one shot. If we do this and they don't buy it, we're toast." Lena nodded. "We'll make them think it's too dangerous to risk finishing us off. If we do it right, we'll buy ourselves enough time to make our escape." As the minutes ticked down, the enemy ship closed in faster, its weapons charged and ready. The sensors flashed red, the hostile ship's targeting locks appearing on their screens. This was it. Lena wasn't sure if it was faith or desperation that kept her hand steady on the throttle, but she wasn't about to let her crew die without a fight. Then, something strange happened. The enemy ship halted. Not just slowed, halted. It began to drift, as if unsure how to proceed. Their weapons were still primed, but the targeting reticule on Lena's screen flickered, then wavered. They weren't firing. "They're hesitating," Tessa said, her voice almost incredulous. "They..." "Don't stop the broadcast," Lena interrupted. "Keep it going. We need them to think we're about to take them with us." Joran worked frantically, his eyes scanning the readings. "The shields are at critical. We're at full overload. If they don't pull back, it's going to blow." But still, the enemy ship did not fire. Instead, it drifted further back. Then, a garbled transmission came through. "This is the Aegis, stop your advance immediately. We are in a self-destruct sequence. We are about to detonate. Do not engage. Repeat, do not engage." Lena didn't flinch. She knew the bluff had worked. The enemy was backing off. They were afraid. But then the transmission broke off, static filling the airwaves. For a moment, Lena thought they had failed, that they'd miscalculated, but then the ship's radar began flashing. The enemy ship was moving away. slowly at first, but with growing speed. "They're retreating," Tessa said, disbelief in her voice. "It worked. They're actually pulling back." Lena let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Her pulse was still racing, but the danger had passed. They were alive. For now. "Okay, team," Lena said, her voice a little steadier now, "let's get this ship back in working order. We're not done yet." There was a long pause as her crew slowly realized what had just happened. They had done it. Against all odds, they had turned their near-certain demise into a victory. "We actually pulled it off," Joran said, a surprised chuckle escaping his lips. "I don't know whether to laugh or cry." Tessa laughed, a sound full of relief and disbelief. "I've never been so happy to be alive." Lena allowed herself a brief smile before looking out at the stars. They weren't out of danger yet. There were still repairs to be made, systems to bring back online. But they had survived. They had come up with a plan when everything seemed lost, and against the odds, it had worked. And as the ship limped toward safety, Lena knew something deep down, something that could never be erased from her thoughts. Humanity had survived against all odds. They had used ingenuity, willpower, and an almost reckless sense of determination to make it out. And that was something that no enemy could ever truly calculate or defeat. She wasn't sure what the future held, but one thing was certain: they would always find a way to fight. Always.